From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome back to the show on this glorious Independence Day weekend. I hope you'll at least get in a few hours of fun time between all the rain showers and thunderstorms. We have become Seattle with tornadoes. That's my weather forecast. So anyway, it's probably a busy day in America's boardrooms. I'm imagining a big meeting at BP this morning with all the legal minds sitting around the table. They're trying to figure out if being told to clean up oil spills violates the corporation's religious beliefs. I mean, if the corporation believes that God wouldn't have let them dump 200 million gallons of crud into the Gulf unless it was part of God's divine plan, then who's the government to impinge on their religious freedom, right? And probably the guys who brought us the credit fault swaps and the zero collateral mortgages are all looking to get religion now too. We'll see how this all works out. But today, more seriously, on this July 4th weekend, crime and punishment. What do we want government to do when bad guys do bad things? We catch them and put them in prison, for starters. But what then? Do we as a society have a responsibility to the people we incarcerate? Should they just rot in prison, as some people say, or should we actively attempt to rehabilitate them, maybe even educate them? Wouldn't it be something if we give them job training? And when they leave prison, should we continue to offer help or just send them away and wait for them to return in a few months or years to the prison? And what about registries? In recent years, we've decided that sex offenders are so odious that even after they're done and their time is finished, they've paid their social debt, we'll keep track of where they live, where they work, where they travel to, probably forever. But we don't do the same thing for those guys we were just talking about who pillaged Chicago's poor neighborhoods with their junk mortgages that left thousands of people with homes that were empty. We don't even do it for murderous gangbangers. So where exactly are our values? What exactly do we as society want? Well, today, Jennifer Vollen-Katz is here from the John Howard Association, who's going to answer all of these questions. So if you just hang around for a couple of minutes, you will find the answers to all of these questions. They've been doing this for about 113 years at the John Howard Association. You're the juvenile justice coordinator there, right?
I am, yeah.
Well, welcome to the show. And also this other guy, Rob Wildeboer, is here, the award-winning reporter for criminal and legal affairs at WBEZ, who's reported on all these things for just a little less than 113 years. And this is sort of your last day at WBEZ for a while, right?
For a little while, going on a year-long leave of absence to do a fellowship. So
good for you, my friend. These are almost like professional vacations of some kind, aren't they? I mean, you're going
I
to
didn't
improve
include
yourself.
that in my application, but that's how I was looking at
You're
it.
going to improve yourself,
yes.
of course, but you're also going to be able to just hang out at the University of Michigan and take any classes you want. My God, what a great thing. Do they have those for cable access talk shows?
It's the very same one I'm doing.
It's the very same one, right? Okay, so we wanted to do this because there are these things that keep coming up on the show over and over again where these sort of questions hang in the air, these questions I was just talking about. And I just thought you guys would be just great people to have come in and talk to us about this sort of big picture thing on this holiday weekend. So let's talk about the big picture. How many prisons are there, I guess, state prisons in Illinois, and how many people are incarcerated in Illinois?
Okay, so let me give you sort of a thumbnail sketch of our prison system here in Illinois. We have about 20 adult facilities, which range from our maximum securities to mental health specific facilities to minimum security. That houses approximately 49,000 adults in the state of Illinois.
Wow.
And then we have 6 separate juvenile facilities in the state of Illinois with approximately 800 youth. Now there is some crossover in terms of who that population could be, youth and adult within the 18 to 21 year old range. So there's a little bit of confusion, and there are also many people actually within our Illinois criminal justice system with multiple statuses. So one can be on juvenile parole and also be on adult probation and adult parole all at the same time. And some of these people may ping pong back and forth between the two systems within a few year period. I don't have the current numbers of individuals on parole in Illinois, but it's high, very high. There's, I think, approximately 1,200 youth compared to the 800 in facility.
Wow.
So I
Wow.
assume that the adult number as of today's count is high, several thousand on adult parole at least.
Wow.
So those are people that are still being overseen technically by the Illinois Department of Corrections, because parole is simply an arm of the corrections agency.
And in addition to that, you've got, there's about 49,000 people behind bars right now, but some of those people will be let go this year and more people will come in. You have about 33,000 people who exit the facilities each year.
Is that right?
33,000 people come out of the prisons every year back to our communities. And so when we talk about the general mission of prisons, we don't just send people away and they go and we're done with them.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
33,000 are
Yeah.
coming back into the neighborhoods
Right.
this
So-
year.
so
So about 72,000 people in and out of the prison system per year, according to the
So
Department
the
of
Right.
number
Corrections.
stays fairly stable. I mean, those 33,000 who come out, about another 30,000 go back in, or not go back in, but enter the system?
That's certainly how it's been for the last several years.
Wow.
Our numbers have remained fairly constant.
Wow.
And same with the detention centers as well. Like Cook County Jail remains close to the 10,000 mark. It cycles through a lot of different, far more
Yeah.
people than that,
Yeah.
but the population
Yeah.
remains at a fairly constant
So-
number.
Well, I think it has gone up since Quinn took office. I mean, if you look over 40 years, it's exploded, the population, which is what we're trying to deal with now. And then even if you look over, I think since Quinn took office over the last 6 years, it's gone up a few thousand, 2,000 or 3,000. Remember there was the early release
Right,
program?
right.
And he put the kibosh on that
Yeah.
during when he was running for election against
Yeah.
Dan Hines, and there were some problems with that. So that pushed up the population again, and then they've tried to keep it down, but yeah, it's still hovering around 49,000.
So is it possible to get a general sense of, I mean, these are conversations that just come up around this table all the time about disproportionate minority representation in the prison populations and all the rest of it, but who are these people? Are they dangerous murderers? Are they embezzlers?
Very few white collar criminals in the state system in particular, and very few, I mean, the vast majority are nonviolent offenders, and a huge number of them are mentally ill on top of being nonviolent offenders.
Tom Dart says he runs the biggest mental facility in Illinois at Cook
And
County Jail.
I think that's probably right. He's been quoted as saying 28% of his population at the Cook County Jail is mentally ill. National studies indicate numbers far higher in most correctional institutions. 73% of all women, 55% of all men are mentally ill within the national correction system.
So do you know, I hear this a lot, oh, it's the nonviolent offenders. Let's get rid of the nonviolent offenders. We have nonviolent offenders filling up our jails. And sure enough, when I've been in prisons, I've talked to guys who have, I'm thinking of one guy in particular who stole $111 worth of merchandise, or tried. Wasn't successful, obviously. He's in jail, right? Or in prison. Tried to steal $111 of merchandise from JCPenney. But given his history and drug offenses and the rest, he's in prison for 2 years for that $111 theft. Now, I think we should have a conversation about the wisdom of that. Even assuming he's gonna, let's say he goes and steals from JCPenney once a week. Let's say he's gonna do that for the next 2 years. Even in then, does it make sense to pull him off the street for 2 years and spend $50,000 to lock him up? I think there's a conversation to be had about that. But in terms of the nonviolent offenders, do you have any idea of, when we say nonviolent offenders, how many people in prison are actually nonviolent offenders in the Illinois state prison system? Because the folks that I've run into, they don't end up there on the first time they're caught with a blunt. It's been many times, or there have been various run-ins with the law. So when we say nonviolent offenders,
that's one of my first questions is how do you define this nonviolent offenders? Because that term gets thrown around all the time when you're talking about the heavy populations in the prisons.
Right.
Well, so many of them are nonviolent. Well, okay, but what does that mean? Why are they there?
Well, I think there's sort of two pieces to it. So anytime you kind of analyze, and let's just call them an offender for purposes of this conversation, in terms of are you violent or are you nonviolent, I think there are two things coming into play by anyone's calculation, whether it's a judge or a prosecutor or a defense attorney. It's a combination of what is the offense we're dealing with or looking at right now, and what is your criminal history. So sometimes people get kicked up or are considered more violent than the offense conduct they're being sentenced for right now might indicate based on their criminal history. I mean, as you point out, somebody may not be put in prison because of this one offense. It's because they've been in front of this judge over and over and over, and they have failed to show a change while put on probation.
Can I just interrupt with one point there, because I think this is something that I think is an interesting adjunct to that. Toni Preckwinkle appeared on the My Chicago show on Channel 11 a couple of weeks ago and was talking about this, and she said, and I actually transcribed this, she said that she said, quoting her, most of the people in jail are there because, in Cook County Jail, are there because they can't pay their bond. Only 10% of them are actually serving sentences. 90% are there because of other reasons. But 90% are awaiting trial, and 70% of those who are awaiting trial for nonviolent crimes. Now, Rob, you and I were at the City Club when Anita Alvarez was taking questions from the press, and somebody brought that up to her, and she said, yeah, that's true, but the fact of the matter is that those people who, you know, everybody's all bleeding heart about because they're nonviolent crimes, those same people have been in prison before, they've been in the juvenile, or they've been in the justice system for years, and they have committed violent crimes in the past. So that raises this whole question about when you get picked up and processed through the system, your history follows you, right?
It does. It follows you, although it may not necessarily ever be totally fleshed out. I mean, what follows you is a rap sheet, right? Saying how many times you've been in court and what you've been charged with and what the end result legally was of those charges. What doesn't seem to follow anybody is something like a social history. I mean, the reasons why someone may be there or the reasons they failed to be successful on probation. You know, a lot of the larger issues that play into why somebody ends up being an offender or why they may have participated in the current offense. That information is not captured, and it certainly doesn't follow people through the system. So we don't have a very full picture on any individuals there about why they're there. We can guess at it, and we know a lot about the people that end up in our system. And there's a lot of substance abuse, there's a lot of mental illness, there's a lot of kind of system failures before they enter our criminal justice system that lead them to there.
You know, I feel like when we talk about this issue a lot, you know, there's a general recognition in this country that we have gone hog wild on mass incarceration, right? And so everybody wants to dial that back. But politically, it seems like the only way to do that is to say, oh, we've got nonviolent offenders and we're going to let the nonviolent offenders go, and boom, problem solved, mass incarceration over. And so this is where, you know, it's a flaw on my part that I have never reported out Preckwinkle claiming, you know, 70% of the people in the Cook County Jail are nonviolent offenders.
Well, she said are awaiting trial for nonviolent crimes.
She's said in the past many times, 70% are nonviolent offenders. And so it's incumbent on us to figure out what that means. And I can imagine a politician arguing that they're nonviolent offenders when they're trying to empty the jail because that's politically feasible. And it seems like what needs to happen is we need to get to a point where society, and I don't know if this ever can happen, where society can say, yeah, that's a bad crime, but we still don't think prison is the appropriate punishment for that. Like the only thing we can do is, if it's nonviolent, okay, then we'll let you go. Can we get to a place where there's a more thoughtful matrix about, like, yes, okay, crime A, this is bad, but still doesn't rise to the level of prisons. Crime B, this is bad, still doesn't rise to the level of prisons. Will we ever get to a spot where
but
society
on your matrix,
can
what
do
if you have 12 of them? 12 of those crimes that don't rise, then does it rise?
Well, the question is, will we get to a place where the public will accept, yes, we need to let some people go, even though there's some risk inherent there. The subtext of it's a nonviolent offender is the public's not at risk, don't worry, we can let these guys go, they don't need to be filling up our jails. But in the case of the guy who is stealing all the time, he's a screw up, he's going to steal from JCPenney, we know he's going to do it, can we at that point still say, yeah, even then prison is not the appropriate sanction for him? Because I feel like, well, dealing with mass incarceration is going to take more than just, oh, let's let out the nonviolent offenders.
Right. It'll take lawsuits like the state of California to be urged to let people go. No, but to address your point, I mean, I think that's great. A great idea, and I think it would be a huge step forward in terms of where we are in our criminal justice system if we were able to look and as a society and make distinctions between violent and not violent, and to be a little bit more realistic, a little bit more open-minded about who's really a threat to society. Because the reality is we keep locking people up and locking people up, right? I understand there was recently a statistic that came out that while the United States of America is 5% of the world population, we have 25% of the world's prisoners, right? But are we any safer? I mean, are the levels of crime going down that dramatically? Are personal violent crimes, crimes against people, any different than they were? I mean, look in Chicago, we lock up people for murder all the time. Has that really stopped any of the gun violence we see on our streets?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but one of the things that contributes so heavily to this is the kind of the stupidization of our politics.
That's just what I was going to say. Is the problem here is politics, because our criminal justice policy in Illinois is mostly based on politics. And it's just not popular to say, all right, he's stealing every week or this much a month, but who's he really hurting? And let's help him
solve his problem, not incarcerate.
Why is he doing this? Is this mental illness driving the ship? Is it that he really can't get a job because he doesn't have enough education or any viable job skills? You know, could we look at retraining him? Like, what are our options in terms of helping this guy get back on track? Most people don't want to hear that. Most people don't think that's worth spending their taxpayer money on.
And there are cheeseball politicians out there who will build their entire campaign on, this guy let some dangerous people out, elect me, I'll lock more people up.
Well, that's the other thing is politicians have become, you know, very few politicians campaign on a criminal justice platform, right? It's just not that popular. So almost all criminal justice policy becomes reactionary. And I think one of the governing principles becomes, wait a minute, we better make a rule about this category of people, because even though they may seem nonviolent and even though they may not pose a very likely threat to public safety, what if they get out? You know, what if they do make bond? What if they do get out pending trial, and then they're the one that goes and shoots up a neighborhood? How are we going to look? So I do think a lot of the policy stems from kind of a CYA approach on the part of politicians.
Totally. I was doing some reporting, Ken, you mentioned, on sex offenders recently, and they were lining up outside Chicago Police Department headquarters.
Very good series, by the way.
Thank you, sir. And they're lining up, and then the police department couldn't take them all, and so was turning sex offenders away. And those sex offenders need to register by law, and so the police
who have come out of
prison, and so police are turning them away, and now they're subject to arrest. And so I was talking to a legislator about this, Mike Zaleski, and he was talking about this same kind of the political balance you do here, and he's like, okay, yes, we don't want, you know, we don't want sex offenders to be turned away from the police department, to be subject to arrest, to then be arrested, filling up the jails and prisons when they were trying to register. But he says, you know, the problem is, as a politician who has to run for office every couple of years, he's like, we have to worry about that mailer. You know, that opponent who in 10 months sends out the mailer saying Representative so-and-so eased restrictions on sex offenders, which, but if we want to know where these guys are, we actually want to ease the restrictions. We want to make it easy for them to register so we know where they are, which is the intent of the law. But to actually make it easier on sex offenders is so politically toxic. How does that get done? And you've got legislators like Zaleski who I think are thoughtful and want to be thoughtful about criminal justice and want to start pushing us in the right direction. But how do you do that without that mailer coming out saying Mike Zaleski loves sex offenders?
And the other part about the legislators is that there's this kind of knee-jerk ability to, one of my favorite topics, to sort of mandate sentences. So it's like, now we're going to say that if you do this terrible, horrible thing, then you will go to prison and you will go for 2 years, and forget what the judge said, even though the judge may have heard your case and decided that you don't really need 2 years of incarceration. The law says you have to have it. And we have a mayor and a police superintendent who are out there on the hustings constantly talking about how we have to have more people going to prison for illegal possession of firearms. Now, I don't know, maybe that is a good thing. It's hard to draw the line, but the big picture of it is that we seem to be doing much more of this, just kind of like telling judges how to do their job.
Right, and the end result is that we are filling up our prisons faster, keeping them fuller longer, and we aren't creating any more public safety. I mean, mandatory minimums have not been shown ever to have a deterrent effect on crime. You know, they don't, I mean, again, it comes down to a feel-good solution. It sounds so much better to be able to say, if you commit, if you're convicted of this crime, you will get this many years. But the reality of mandatory minimums is that they are a system blockage, and they aren't shown to do really anything effective or positive. They don't change the number of people who commit a particular crime. I mean, I'm particularly sensitive to it, less from a policy perspective and more as a former life as a defense attorney, and the impact I saw it have on individual defendants that I represented, that there is no room to consider things about individuals that I think should be considered. And I heard many judges express frustration that they had to give.
I just can't imagine what it would be like to be an intelligent, sensitive judge who is sitting there with somebody in front of you who you know doesn't need to have the sentence, but there's nothing you can do. And I said on another show that maybe what we really are moving toward is we just won't need judges anymore. We can just replace them with those kiosks like the city has for you got a parking ticket, you're guilty, pay here. You know, that's it. You just punch in your name and then it just prints out a receipt for which prison you're going to, and that's all there is to it.
Well, if Rob's crime matrix comes into being, where we can all agree on what's violent and what's nonviolent, then I think your kiosk idea stands a better chance of taking off.
That's the second step. In terms of mandatory minimums, I think we have seen, I mean, we definitely saw the Illinois legislature pull away from the mandatory minimums proposed by Mayor Rahm Emanuel and Police Superintendent Gary McCarthy. And my understanding is that the mandatory minimums bill right now in Illinois is dead. And so it's not happening. And what's interesting about this is it's easy to pass a mandatory minimums bill and say, oh, we're going to be tougher on crime. gun crimes, and that's going to help, even though, as Jennifer, I think rightly points out, there's no research to show that mandatory minimums are effective deterrents. But it's easy to pass that. But then what we don't, as a society and as a system and as a legislature, what we don't do is say, okay, well, if we're going to be locking up all these people, you know, how are we going to pay for that, and what's the cost of that? Because right now, I believe the Illinois Department of Corrections spends 2% of its budget on rehabilitation. The rest, 98% of the budget, goes to keeping the lights on, paying the correctional officers, buying the food. So if we think we're sending people there for rehabilitation, I mean, we need to be honest about the fact that we're not. And so when we talk about these laws of increasing sentences, we need to be honest about, you know, okay, well, what's going to be the upshot of that for services inside our facilities, for mental health? You know, when we build a prison, we think, oh, well, we're building a cell block and a cafeteria and a law library, and then we're hiring some COs. But we're also building a hospital. We're also building a hospice care unit. We're also building a mental health facility that needs to be staffed. Very expensive things that we don't think about.
Right. It's interesting because if you look at, as you just pointed out, the Illinois Department of Corrections does not have as a mission to rehabilitate those offenders that come into it. I mean, I've never seen that stated by them. The Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice does have a mission statement that includes the goal of rehabilitation of the offenders that come through its facilities. And the cost per inmate per year in the juvenile system is much higher. I mean, where we're at like, what, $25,000 a year per adult inmate per year in IDOC. There are some facilities in the state of Illinois that are over $100,000 per youth per year, and much of that goes to programming. You know, I do think that if people were to step back and think about the implications of building more prisons or of putting people in prisons and thought about what it is we're paying for, which is really mostly infrastructure, you know, keeping the lights on, keeping these very old, antiquated, in many instances, facilities up and running with huge maintenance costs and things of that nature. And then paired that with the fact that the vast majority of prison inmates return to their communities. And what have they learned? What have they learned? Where are they when they come out? And how do we benefit as a society in terms of their coming from a penal system that doesn't provide rehabilitation or programming or the kind of mental health treatment that might be necessary for many of these people to get back on track? And you start to think about, is this making any sense?
What's the return on our investment
Right.
of $25,000 to put that person away for a year?
Yeah.
What do we get out of
What do
that
we get out of it?
$25,000? And
Yeah.
would we? Is that how we'd choose to spend it if we were?
Can I just change subjects here radically? I heard an interesting discussion on your station yesterday, Rob, with a gentleman who is in favor of the death penalty, making the argument that people who have been assigned to prison for life and life without parole, or people who are there in life sentences, basically just get to sit around and watch TV all day long, and that the prisons in the United States have lost the role of being a place for punishment. And that as long as we're not punishing these people, then they should just be killed. That's a different discussion. But the question that it raises is a really interesting philosophical question. If you've done bad and you've been sent to prison, aren't you supposed to be punished? But what is punishment? And is it one of the roles of Illinois? Does the Department of Corrections punish people?
Well, I have two reactions to that. The first is, I think you said that this individual has been in many prisons throughout the United States.
That's what he said.
Perhaps he and I have visited very different facilities because I draw a very different conclusion, having spent time in prisons all over Illinois, in New York, in the Washington D.C. area. I think if punishment is our goal, we're doing a fine job.
A day room in a cell block is not a terribly pleasant place to hunker down and watch some television.
But you find me a maximum security facility here in Illinois that has a day room. I mean, it's, these people are living in cells far below, what we envision based on TV shows and movies, and not all of them have access to television if you can't afford it through your commissary account. So it's, I think prison is a difficult, horrible place to be, and I think it's, as I said, if punishment is what we're looking for, I think we're doing it just fine. But I think the larger question is, what is the goal? What is the point of prison? And I don't think as a society, in Illinois at least, we have a clear answer to that. I mean, we know that throughout history, people have used prisons for many different purposes, to rehabilitate, to punish, to deter, to incapacitate. And without a clear mission statement, I think we're solving a political problem more than addressing a coherent criminal justice philosophy in this state.
Philosophically, I mean, the punishment is the deprivation of freedom. It's not being thrown into a dark, damp hole. Although,
and whipped or something.
Yeah. So I think that's the punishment we focus on, and then probably the other thing the prisons do well is incapacitate. Someone's going to have a hard time committing another crime while they're in there.
I still have 5 or 6 more questions, big issue questions, but we have run out of time, so that's where that's a good place to leave it, because all of these questions remain completely unanswered and will for a long time, I'm sure. But as you say, they have to be resolved in the political arena, and the political arena is a 3-ring circus at the moment. So, anyway, Rob, good luck to you, sir. Have a wonderful time, and I hope to hear you back on BEZ in a year or so.
Yep,
okay,
for sure.
All right. And Jenny, thank you so much for being here from the John Howard Association. I hope we'll have you guys back again sometime. All right?
Thank you.
Thanks. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. You can see us anytime you want to do that, but you can also watch us at your leisure by checking us out right here at this particular address. And you can also subscribe on iTunes, and I hope you'll do that. I'm Ken Davis. See you next week with another show right here on Chicago Newsroom. Take it easy. Happy 4th of July.